Hello, how are you doing? I hope everyone had an amazing week. And so we are going to be continuing on the topic today of neurodivergence and starseeds. So if you're watching, just let me know in the chat how the sound is. I watched some of the previous lives in this series and I noticed that the sound was really bad. So I did some tests and tried to improve it for this week. The program just wasn't picking up the sound from the mic. I think it was using something from the laptop. I hate when that happens because then it doesn't sound good, and better sound quality makes all the difference. Okay, so just reviewing, what this topic is about. So we're talking about neurodivergence and starseeds or lightworkers. So I'm going through different qualities that are similar between starseeds, lightworkers, and people who are neurodivergent. So that can be typically autism, ADHD, and one of the things that is happening is that the terms have changed. So autism used to represent people with below average IQ. So they typically had learning disabilities. But according to the DSM-5, autism now includes what used to be Asperger's. So people with the same condition but with average to high IQ. So we've got this transition where people aren't really sure of what the term means, and they will see people who are diagnosed as autistic and they will say, you don't look autistic. But that's partly due to the fact that we have a changing definition for this. And of course, we have ADHD and autism that are showing up co-occurring, so people who are diagnosed with both. The reason that I was comparing neurodivergence as a general term that includes conditions that tend to occur together but aren't necessarily the same thing. So you can have one but not the other. The reason that I'm discussing this is because we often search for answers when our lives are difficult, when they don't seem within the norm, when we are outside of the system and we're struggling to fit into the system. So we can try to reach towards the medical community, we can try to find scientific reasons, and when that fails to give us answers, we can also seek answers through spiritual reasons and spiritual means. And the spiritual knowledge and spiritual ideas, like the whole collection of spiritual systems and these whole belief systems, they help us explain phenomena and experiences in our lives that aren't easily explained in other ways. So they're helpful. What I'm concerned about is that we have both this lack of awareness of what neurodiversity is, what autism looks like, and how we've got people who are being diagnosed as adults slowly who completely got missed, and they didn't receive the resources or help that they might have been able to get otherwise. That might have explained some of the struggles they had in life. Now, if you don't have that kind of explanation, and you do fall into that range of experience, and you're looking solely to spirituality to explain that. Now, you can have a mix of both. You can have be very spiritual and have very spiritual experiences, but also have these other factors. You could be autistic, or you could have ADHD, and you could have this situation where you've got these other factors which are making your life really, really difficult, And you might have this spiritual reason why, but this spiritual reason why could actually be preventing you from getting the help and support that you need. And so that's the disadvantage there. And that's the drawback of only having a spiritual approach, or only having a scientific approach, or only depending on the medical community for support, because you might not get all the support that you need. So that's why I'm saying, look at, all these different explanations for what could be going on, or for what could be happening in your life, and use these ideas to help yourself, to make your life easier, because you don't necessarily need to create extra reasons why your life has to be difficult. If you can resonate with some of the things that we've been talking about, some of the experiences that we're going to be talking about. So today we're going to be focusing on autistic traits, and specifically what is described in the DSM-5. And next week we're going to be talking more about ADHD, and of course this is going to take a while. We're not going to be able to get through everything in this session. We're going to have to even do more sessions within this series, because there's some very important and interesting points that can be made, and especially as you listen to people who are knowledgeable and experienced. So like next week we're going to be looking at a video by Dr. K, who has the Healthy Gamer channel, who is a licensed doctor, and then also someone who does research on ADHD. So they come with a lot of knowledge. And so I think it's important to be able to have those perspectives as well, because there are people who have the lived experience, who have important things to say, but then there's also people from like a clinical and research standpoint who can really get into the nitty-gritty and start to like separate and make differentiations on, well, this is a result of certain symptoms that you're having, and we can treat the symptoms, but then all the after effects of how this has affected your life, this could take a lot longer to solve. And there's, in terms of a clinical or a treatment perspective, it's much more complicated. And so they talk about how it's important to be able to like pull these things apart and describe them with more clarity. So you can have spiritual reasons why your life is difficult. So I'm going to give an example here. So one of the struggles can be difficulty in emotional regulation. And so we're going to see with someone who is autistic some of the reasons why that happens. But for now we can just say, we have someone who has difficulty with emotional regulation. So if we want to spiritualize this, one of the things that we could say about this is that you are an empath, and you are taking on the emotional burdens and healing the trauma of the collective. Now, I think there could be a mix of both. There could be difficulty with emotional regulation, and there could be this aspect of you healing your own trauma, and maybe even taking on other people's trauma. So I'm not discounting anything, and I'm very much in both realms. And of course, you need to take what feels good for you, what is helpful for you at the time. And remember, the human experience is a state of being, and whatever perceptions you have through this state of being doesn't represent the totality of existence. And that means that you have to embrace whatever perspectives are helpful for you within that state. So it doesn't matter if on a base level of truth you don't exist. Is that really helpful for you in the moment? So for example, you have Leo Gura's actualize.org channel that talks a lot about enlightenment, and he goes through the question, do you exist? So that can be helpful sometimes, right? But if you're living your life you're in this vessel, this physical body, that's not always helpful. So part of the point of why I'm doing this series is just to bring awareness to, yeah, you know what, I struggle with that, and yeah, maybe that is an issue for me, or I know people in my life who struggle with that, and maybe instead of having judgment for them, I can recognize, they're struggling with that, and not necessarily that they get a free pass for everything, but maybe I can recognize ways where I could be understanding, or where there could actually be helpful solutions. You could be struggling and just hitting your head against a brick wall trying to make a situation work, when there could be solutions that are easier and make the situation easier. Maybe you just didn't realize that that was something you needed to do. Okay, so we're going to get into it. The Neurodivergence and Starseeds, Part 3. And I use starseeds in the sense of lightworkers here. So last week I had a question about exactly what is neurodivergence or neurodiversity. So I'm just going to define it a little more clearly this time. So I got this from an article by Harvard Health Publishing, What is Neurodiversity? And I will include the links in the description below after the live. So people experience and interact with the world around them in different ways. And this term is often used in the context of autism, spectrum disorder, ASD, or ADHD. Now, of course, some people who fall into the category of autism don't like to consider it a disorder. They like to consider themselves as whole, complete people with unique traits. Some traits are advantageous, and some traits make life a lot more difficult. There was a neurodiversity movement in the 90s to increase acceptance and inclusion. And the idea behind this was to promote equality and inclusion of neurological minorities. And this is very important. We talked about in previous lives how the corporate world tends not to be very accepting of neurodiversity. There is this social expectation to be socially skilled, socially fluent, play social games, be competitive, and it's looked down upon if you're not like that. You're seen as lesser. And there's no recognition for, that's not your skill set. Unless maybe because of your neurodiversity, you end up working in IT or in the tech sector, and some of your skills or talents may be able to shine there in certain ways, and then there's just this acceptance, that's kind of what this group of people tends to be like, so we're not going to expect that from them. But still, there is this lack of inclusivity, because there's this lack of recognition that, not everyone starts on the same playing field. People do have different strengths and weaknesses, and by not expecting things from people which have a huge amount of effort that it takes for them to do that, and it's really not that important if you think about priorities, they can put more effort into the kind of work which is going to give a lot of benefit. So if you're spending your life putting a lot of energy into things that aren't giving you a lot of benefit or really aren't that important, If you start putting that energy into other things which are going to give you a lot better result and benefit, like that kind of shift, instead of trying to fit in, if you're going to be a little different and highlight and accept those differences and use them as strengths, then like that can make a huge change in your life. So there's this internal level acceptance and also an external level as well. Okay, so it just mentioned how neurodiversity is often used in the context of autism and ADHD. So this article had some notes on autism. So autism includes differences in communication, learning, and behavior, and it's different from person to person. There's a huge amount of differences, and what can be shown the most definitively is you've got the extremes. So when they do brain scans on people who are autistic, the results show that they have increased neurological activity within the area that is typically like lit up when they're doing a certain task, or it's the opposite. So there can be a lot more activity or a lot less. There's a wide range of strengths, abilities, needs, and challenges within the neurodivergent spectrum. So you've got people who are neurodiverse who can communicate effectively, have an average or high IQ, and live independently. And so they might be putting a lot of extra effort into things like socialization and things that are difficult for them and be compensating for their areas of weakness. However, you can also have people who have a lot of difficulty communicating needs or emotions, struggle with harmful or impairing behaviors, and be dependent. So it didn't specify what the harmful or impairing behaviors were, but these could include things that are maybe socially disadvantageous. Because it also said, these differences may not cause direct suffering, so they might not be engaging in self-harm as a direct result of the autistic traits. However, this kind of suffering, it can come from social barriers, exclusion and inequity, from appearing different, from appearing like they're lacking. So you can have this spiky skills distribution profile. So you can be very talented in certain areas, but then be extremely lacking in other areas. And this is tricky because all of a sudden you've got this gap where people will look at you and think you're strange because why don't you know about that? Like, that's so weird that you don't have any awareness or knowledge of that thing that seems so generic to most people. And it can also almost seem like you're an alien who's been plopped onto Earth into a human body and is trying to human. So it's a very interesting experience. So I've seen someone who exhibited this. We're having a discussion and they demonstrated like these specific gaps in knowledge. So they were quite good at their job, but then there's these basic general things that as we're talking, so they're trying to use what skills they had to engage in conversation, but there were these specific deficits. And of course, like within, the areas where they were comfortable with it, they had maybe practiced certain scripts or they were familiar with that situation, they were able to maneuver through it. But then you talk about a new topic that they're not familiar with or this new situation, and all of a sudden they're a fish out of water. So, people who are neurodiverse may have autism, ADHD, or both. What tends to happen is they can also have a range of co-occurring issues. Dyslexia, so that's difficulty with reading, writing. Dyscalculia, so that's difficulty with numbers. And dyspraxia, so that's difficulty with movement, being quite awkward. So the last thing I talked about in this article was solutions or accommodations for the workplace. Providing quiet spaces. So remember, we've got this variation. So we've got, if someone has ADHD, they're going to need a certain level of stimulation to be able to focus. They have this optimal range. So they don't want too little stimulation and they don't want too much stimulation. They have this optimal range. So if you have pressure to be quiet, that may be difficult for them to focus. They could also use headphones, but if you judge them for that and say like, no, you're not allowed to use headphones, some people will watch a video while they work because they need that level of stimulation to be able to focus. So for other people, it's really distracting. They think how could you work like that, right? But then it just means that the brain is wired differently. So in our office, we have fidget toys, and this is a big thing. There was a senior developer who likes to buy toys, and so they bought these little rubber toys where you push the little circular things in and out. We've got like rubber duckies. And someone has they bring in they're very intricate fidget toys. They're kind of cool. So you've got some people, they need a lot of quiet to be able to focus. So I've always been like this and I've gotten better. I'm on the side where I needed to focus quite a bit. I needed quiet to focus. So if you provide quiet spaces, but there's also spaces where people are allowed to be louder, you're providing an environment for different people to work according to what works for them. Also, flexible seating. That allows people to choose where they want to sit. So another thing, avoiding sarcasm, euphemisms, and implied messages. Sometimes people are joking around and it's lighthearted and fun, and maybe it's not such an issue there, but if you're dealing with things that are directly related to work, things need to be clear. So some people will need concise verbal and written instructions for tasks. So they will need things clear and laid out. Also, some people will need these instructions to be short. Break tasks down into smaller steps. So this is individual. So you don't want to make assumptions about what a person's individual preferences, needs, and goals are. You want to ask. If you inform people about social etiquette and don't assume someone's being rude, you give them the benefit of the doubt. So at least if they have at least one experience where they know, okay, you know what, that kind of thing, it's frowned on here, and you give them a pass, at least once, that can help. Where they don't feel alienated for doing something that they weren't even aware was taboo. Another thing, so some of the reasons for this advice, it will come up in the next section. Giving advance notice for changing plans and providing reasons. So if you have people who are autistic and they struggle with things that are changing, adapting to changes, making transitions, if they have a hard time with that, then providing that advance notice will give them some time to be able to adapt to it. So they might be able to recognize, okay, that's going to be tricky for me. Maybe I can make some accommodations for myself to make that easier. Because if something is too stressful, a lot of the times people are going to have a lot of resistance. And if you just spring something on someone and they're not ready for it, you can come up with a lot of resistance against that. Okay, so this is what we're going to spend the bulk of today talking about. Today we're looking mostly at autism. Next week we'll be looking closely at ADHD. So I'm using a video by Orion Kelly uncovering hidden autistic traits. So he's primarily talking about getting diagnosed and what the criteria are, what the official criteria are, and he talks about how this is difficult as an adult because a lot of the criteria doesn't directly apply to adults. A lot of it's geared towards diagnosing children, which is unfortunate because a lot of people get missed and they don't have an awareness that, the reason why they might be struggling might be due to being neurodivergent. Okay, so looking at this criteria, we can see that there is very specific criteria to be able to be diagnosed. Now, even if you don't meet this criteria, you can still have these kind of traits. You can still identify and resonate, with these topics. You don't necessarily have to be diagnosed to be able to accommodate yourself. Maybe you need a formal diagnosis for other accommodations, and especially if you want to get medication, there is ADHD medication available. No medication for autism as far as I'm aware. But even this kind of knowledge can help you to accommodate yourself and realize, what? Maybe I'm going to stop putting so much effort and pouring so much effort into trying to fit in. And this might be even in unconscious ways. Okay, so the first criteria is persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. So this can be difficult to see because maybe people will just label someone as introverted. They'll say, oh, they have no friends, and maybe it's their own fault. Maybe they don't try hard enough, like they could do X, Y, and Z. And of course, there are people who push themselves to become different, to try to fit in, to try to engage with other people more. So in high school, I was very quiet. Definitely through all of my life, I was tended to the introvert side. And I did have some friendships in high school, but wasn't super close and drifted apart from these friendships over time, which does happen. But I didn't have a lot of confidence in my social skills. And something that was a huge revelation for me was discovering this technique where you look into the mirror and you imagine yourself having the attributes of something or someone that you see as strong and powerful. So imagining yourself as a tiger or having the attributes of a tiger. So this is a technique that I use. Like, I imagined myself having this strength and courage, and I built this up in myself. And it was amazing because I felt a lot better. So after high school, I started approaching people. I was going to college, so I'd approach people in the hallway. I would listen to for their names when we did a roll call, and I would approach them in the hallway and I would say their name as if I already knew them. And of course, at the time, I wasn't aware that this was something socially taboo to do. Or that it would just like freak people out because they had no idea who I was. And suddenly I apparently knew who they was. So maybe it came off as a bit creepy. I got some negative responses for that. But I think I was a little bit oblivious to what was socially right and wrong as well. So I just thought, you know what? Because socializing was kind of scary for me. But this technique that I used, it gave me that confidence. So I just went ahead and did it. Just went up to people and introduced myself. And I would get this look of surprise on their face. I mean, the look of surprise was not a bad look. It was more the surprise and like almost towards, not disgust, but like a lot of discomfort, which that wasn't so pleasant. I'm glad I didn't double down on that and continue on that path, that I had enough self-awareness to realize, okay, you know what, that's not working out so well. But I think for at least a year, I was fairly consistent about just going up to people and introducing myself. And over time, I did develop more social nuance, but I also became less motivated to put in the effort, because I thought, you know what, I'm putting in so much effort, like, why am I trying so hard? No one appreciates it. You know, this kind of, maybe we could call it a negative attitude, but also a recognition that, you know what is really worth my time? What's really worth my effort? Maybe this isn't, worth that level of effort. Maybe I want to invest more time and effort into developing relationships with people who have a similar level of interest and engagement with me. So I used this imagining myself as a tiger in front of the mirror approach. I also used this concept of realizing, you know what? I had this realization, you know what? Everyone is just playing a character. And if I just play this character, it's not myself, but if I just play this character, I can engage in social situations. So we'll talk about this later as like an aspect of one of the criteria, where, it's the aspect of what we can call masking. Playing this character or playing this role to fit in. So this was a big revelation for me, like, oh wow, you just play this character. And it didn't occur to me that most people aren't playing a character. And I think everyone plays a character to some degree, but most people aren't, dedicating themselves to playing this role or playing this character in their lives. And it's so interesting because, there is this invisible aspect. We have this lived experience, and maybe you could be very intelligent, and maybe you're covering up these deficits with your intelligence. You're noticing these kind of patterns, and maybe other people aren't able to pinpoint and say, you know what, that person's neurodivergent because there's not an awareness. They could say you're weird or you're quirky. And this was fairly disappointing to me, realizing that the people around me thought that I was weird or quirky, because I didn't realize that I was portraying that way. I thought I was doing an amazing job and maybe being normal, and I wasn't even conscious of it. So, as a side note, I have not been diagnosed as autistic or having ADHD. And I may not meet the criteria. Of course, we'll see that again later. I may not meet the criteria for being diagnosed as autistic. I think I would probably fall into the category of being autistic rather than ADHD. But it doesn't mean that you don't have some of these traits, and it doesn't mean that you don't resonate, with this topic, and that you can't use some of these ideas to improve your life. And people talk about, you can self-diagnose yourself, and is that valid or not? Does it matter? Does it matter if it's valid or not? What matters is, how you see yourself, and if that gives you the freedom to be more accepting of yourself, to stop pressuring yourself to put yourself into a box, to put yourself into, specific roles or situations that use a huge amount of energy for you, you're getting burned out, you're not doing well in your life, then it's beneficial and it's helpful. Okay, so we're at the first point for the criteria for being autistic according to the DSM-5, and I got this from Orion Kelly's video, Uncovering Hidden Autistic Traits. So we're talking about the deficits in social communication. So there may be an abnormal approach. So I'm interpreting that as the way you're approaching people is comes off as quite strange. I was in a bookshop and I had this guy come up to me and just say, like, "You're beautiful." And it was in a very naive, innocent kind of way. And I recognized that, that was a really honest, beautiful expression of what they felt in that moment. And it wasn't intended to be creepy or make me feel uncomfortable. It wasn't like socially attuned, because most people wouldn't do that. But still, that was that person expressing themselves fully authentically in that moment. And of course, this abnormal approach, when people lack that social awareness, that can result in people coming off as creepy as well. It just depends on the context, right? Okay, so then another deficit in social communication would be this failure of normal back and forth. There's a typo there, it says batch. It should say back and forth conversation. And a reduced sharing of interest, emotions, or affect. So, like, this could express itself in different ways. This could include someone's like not emotionally responding, like with their facial features, or they're not emotionally connecting to what you're saying. Maybe someone's describing something that was really sad for them, and the other person is just not picking up on this at all. And the last point here is failure to initiate or respond to social interactions. One example of this that shows up is the flirting. Flirting can be extremely difficult. And like dating just in general, you've got all these social expectations, and how do you navigate them? Of course, my approach was just to go up to the person and say hello and introduce myself and be quite direct. When I was studying for computer science, I didn't start out in computer science. I started out going for medicine, which was not for me. I was trying to fit into a box that was just not fitting for me. I knew, like, this is too much social interaction. I cannot handle. Especially, I saw my GP and I saw what they were doing, and I thought, there's no way I could ever do that. And you can know that something's not for you and not fully know why, but I just knew I could not do that. Too much interaction with people. Way too stressful. Of course, you could have a script, but still, that social pressure can be exhausting. And of course, when you don't know how to initiate or respond properly to social situations, like things where, like, you have a script, you know what's expected of you, like, you can probably do that. But if you don't, that creates a lot of difficulty. So when I was studying for computer science, I asked a friend, okay, so how do you get this started? Trying to go on a date with someone. So I had this specific person that I wanted to go on a date with, and I asked a female friend, like, how do I do this? And she said, you ask him, do you want to hang out? And I thought, this is very strange. Like, why would you say you want to hang out if what you actually want to do is go on a date? But I followed her advice as I asked him, do you want to hang out? So he picks me up, we go to a bar, have a good time, and afterwards I wonder, like, how was that not a date? Anyways, so we hang out again. He buys me dinner. And then we went, there was a park nearby, so we went in the park nearby and he brought some wine. And we had this very interesting conversation. Looking back, he was very, very likely neurodivergent. Like the weirdest topic of conversation. Like, it was very, very strange, but I was very into it. I thought this guy was so cool. He was, like, very different. He had this, his style was like vintage thrifted clothing. But you know how, like, vintage clothing is in fashion? Well, this was like the kind of vintage which is not in fashion. Like, it's not cool. You look at it and it's like I see what you're trying to do there, but it's not quite like what people would consider fashionable, but it's very distinctive. And I thought it was really cool. Yeah, thank you for joining Luminal Mind. Late, but always on time. Yeah, thanks. Thank you for joining. I know I delayed an hour because I wanted to get in some time, like, going for a hike with my mom. Just spending some extra time with her because it's Mother's Day weekend. Yeah, so there's different examples you could use for this social emotional reciprocity, and where you're not sure how to initiate something or respond, and like, this whole dating thing was so confusing to me. And of course, like, this connection didn't last long. I didn't have patience for, like, this nuance kind of thing. And I was like, yeah. I mean, I've had dates. I've had guys ask me out, but it's never lasted long. Like, never lasted more than a couple dates. And this was so frustrating. Not understanding how dating works, not understanding how other people are dating, me feeling like I'm incompetent and I'm a loser because I can't figure it out. And looking and learning about this kind of thing helps me realize, like, no, it's okay. It's totally fine. It's not your fault. You're not deficient. Actually, you're amazing. Like, let's celebrate the amazing, beautiful parts of you. And let's not give you our dime. Oh, now I'm tearing up. Yeah, stop giving yourself a hard time. Because your brain is wired differently. Like, that's the essence of it. Your brain is wired differently. And so you just, like, you're not fitting into the box in the same way. I mean, this reminds me back to high school, actually middle school. So I was a bit younger, and I had a different group of friends. And I had one friend who was extremely smart, had the highest grades in the class, And she was very open-minded, and she liked to express herself through clothes. And because I had someone in my friend group who was like that, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do that. So I show up at school with like orange genie pants, which are like their Halloween costume. That's okay. And I had this tie-dye blue and white tank top. And I'm in the bathroom, and there's some girls who walk into the bathroom. And I was in the stall, and they're talking about how one of their mothers bought them a thong. I was listening, and I thought, like, they're in a different universe, like a different planet. No way. No way this would ever happen in my household, and no way I would be on board with that kind of thing. But like, I came out of the stall, and they leave the bathroom, and like they give me a look, and they start making like some snide comments about me as they leave the room and what I'm wearing. Like, so there was the aspect of that, feeling that judgment. But I think I was able to brush that off, because what mattered more was that, you know, I was in a friend group which accepted and appreciated that and saw nothing wrong with my clothing choices, which I tended towards very bright, very vibrant colors. I think I didn't have much fashion sense at all. We did a lot of thrift shopping because we didn't have a lot of money to buy clothes, and I bought the strangest clothes, and I wore them. And that's okay. And I think too, because I was athletic and musical and good at school, that I didn't fit into this one box where, like, oh, they're just a nerd, or oh, they're just that category. And so I think that was a blessing, because I didn't see myself as limited to a certain category, and didn't see myself as like, oh, this is my identity, this is who I am, and didn't feel limited in that way. The downside is that I expected myself to be able to do everything, and everyone else did as well, without recognizing any of the limitations that I had. And of course, these series, I have quite a few slides, and they're quite long, because there's lots of examples. And of course, this is my experience, and of course, different people are going to experience these things differently. Infinite worth, radical self-acceptance. There is no box, the box is gone. As I started researching about this, I felt that part of me that was trying to fit in kind of melt away. And I felt that acceptance. So, like, that lack of self-acceptance, like, it can be on a subconscious level that you're not aware of. Permission to be yourself. Give others permission to be themselves, unabashedly authentic. Yeah, thank you so much, Luminal Mind. I think that's so interesting. Failure to initiate or respond to social interactions, right? Like, how deep does this go? Like, you could have a friend group who just unconditionally love and accept you, and it's really sad and unfortunate when people don't have that, but sometimes they're in situations where they don't. I think I had that more in middle school, and I think I fit into a group of friends in high school, but like in my last year, I felt like I really didn't fit there, and did experience some loneliness because of that. So you could be quite socially awkward in some situations. But then if you do find a group of people who will accept you, then you could fit in really well. And I remember, like, even as a child, we did a swim club. So they would have like practice every day, and then swim meets on the weekend. It was quite intense. I was I was never at that level. I think I came every day 1 week for Hell Week. And then I got some best times after that. But I remember avoiding the popular kid group. And in high school, I avoided the popular kid group because I thought, you know what, they don't need me. And I focused on people that didn't fit into that group. That didn't always work out for me. And I do remember this level of insecurity that I had. Like, I didn't have the confidence, to approach these people who were popular. And I had internal judgment around that because, I feel like I'm not good enough to fit in there. And so you're kind of elevating other people on a pedestal, which I can see that same pattern later in life. Like, looking at someone and saying like, oh, like they're good looking and they have social status, and that means I'll have social status if I can attract that person, and it being this competition in this kind of game instead of just, seeing that person as who they are, which I recognize, lots of people are involved in that social game. But, sometimes people have more balance with it, because if you're not good at that awareness of social games, then, and you're trying to play the social game, you can take it too far. Growing up in the 90s, I was never in style. I could never figure it out. I remember girls would make fun of my hair and say I dressed like several grades behind. Oh, yeah, thank you for sharing, Shy Art. I think that's something that's really difficult. Like how do other people know how to dress in style and know what's in style or not? And I think like maybe you can develop those skills, but it can take a lot of effort. And that's really hard. We had a dress code, so in some respects that helped me to avoid the judgment. And that isn't that interesting? Like, you can have situations in your life where you don't recognize these specific traits because they're not standing out because of the specific situation. And I look back and I think about in high school, I didn't experience overwhelm or burnout because I had special consideration because I was an athlete. I only had to go to school for half days. So the overwhelm of being in high school, which was draining and exhausting, I only had to endure it for half days. And I think that's what allowed me to do really well. Also, there was a lot of structure, which does help with people who are autistic. So I look back on that time, I'm like, how was I so able to accomplish what seemed like so much? But it was a very rigid and structured environment. I had someone telling me what to do, piano teacher, coach, people at school, and what I was expected to do. It wasn't crazy, it wasn't rocket science. There were limitations to it. And then later in life, I struggled. Because I didn't have that rigid structure. I had these unrealistic expectations. Because you think, oh, well, I'm able to do well here. Imagine what else I could do. Like, nope. Doesn't necessarily work like that. Okay. So the next aspect is persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple context. Actually, that's the same criteria. The second subpart of that criteria is the deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors used for social interaction. So poorly integrated verbal and nonverbal communication, abnormalities in eye contact. So that's something that people are aware of, like people, they don't want to look you in the eye, and then body language. So what I think they might be referring to here is things that are really obvious. Although how you describe this, you know, do I know what they mean here? I'm not sure, because you could have someone who's neurotypical and someone who is neurodivergent, and they're going to see this differently. Okay, so there could be deficits in understanding and using gestures, a total lack of facial expressions, and nonverbal communication. So, like, this is the thing where people miss subtext. They can, because, you know, people might feel uncomfortable and they'll say yes even when, and they might be grimacing. So they might feel uncomfortable. They might say like, okay. So there can be subtext. When someone says something, there can be underlying things. Like, they might feel uncomfortable with being fully honest. They might say something that implies something else. So this can include missing those kind of things. Okay, the third aspect, deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. So there can be difficulties adjusting behavior to suit various social contexts. So maybe you have a script that you use and it works really well in one social context and not so well for another. Like a very small example I noticed of this was someone at work who they sounded, like the way they talked, they sounded like they were in customer service, but I'm like, we're on the same team. Like, why do you need to talk to me like I'm a customer? I felt like they were putting distance between me and them. They didn't want to be friends, or they didn't want to be close. So they're like acting quite professional. It's very likely that that was not the case. They just had this script of what to say socially, and they didn't want to step outside and be authentic. Because here's the thing, I haven't talked about masking too much yet today, but let's say you have these deficits, and because of these deficits you get a really negative response from other people, and it's humiliating, it's embarrassing, there's shame, you blame yourself, it feels awful. So you develop techniques to cover this up, and a lot of this covering up is called masking. So you're trying to fit in. So, and I lost my train of thought. By the way, let me know how the audio is. I know for the people who are listening, the audio, I don't think it was very good the past few weeks. So let me know if you notice a difference. I'll keep trying to improving it if there's still an issue with it. Okay, yeah, the thought is gone, but we're talking about adjusting behavior to suit various social contexts. So having that nuance. Right, okay, the thought came back. The reason, like, behind masking, a lot of the drive to do that is, let's say, what if you take off the mask? And then the feeling of it is like you have no filter. Most people have a filter, but let's say you're masking, and the crazy thing is, like, you can be masking but not even consciously realize it. It can just be a learned behavior. If you take that mask off, you can basically be unfiltered and just blurt out stuff that is so inappropriate, so embarrassing. It can make you look like you're immature, like it's something that someone a lot younger than you would say. Like, for example, Shy Art, you mentioned, like, those girls making fun of you, saying you dressed like several grades behind. So this is similar where the things you say can sound like, sometimes I felt like the things I said were like something that a teenage boy would say, and that was in my 20s. So you take off the mask because you feel comfortable, and you blurt out something that's like really social and inappropriate, and then you realize after, based on the reactions of the people around you, like for example, I try not to text too much, unless it's like very specific and I know what's going on. I don't have to read subtext because I can't really tell what's appropriate unless it's very straightforward through text messages. But being in person, at least you can like monitor the person and listen to their tone of voice and see the facial expressions and get a reaction, and then you can know like, oh, that was socially inappropriate, or that was okay. And of course, as I got more comfortable to being at work, I would say things like this. So most of the time I have this projection of this image of someone who is together and mature. And I would get into these states where I was really relaxed, and I would say things that I would judge as being really immature. And of course, they were the kind of things that I would judge my coworkers for saying, that, and I would think to myself, oh, they're so immature. And of course, I work in an environment where there is a higher proportion of people who are neurodivergent. So we do get a lot of the time this, it shows up subtly, because they have to be well socially versed enough to be able to have the job in the first place, but it does show up, this lack of social awareness and like this complete aversion to like social maneuvering and the very obscure topics and things that they would say I would judge as being really immature. And of course, once my mask started to drop, I would start to say similar things. And of course, I would have this disconnect where I was judging myself quite heavily for this. If you guys want an example, let me know. Like I came up with these jokes. I forget if I shared already. It was a hit with my coworkers. It was a hit with the male coworkers, like a select few. But not with my mom. My mom did not appreciate this joke at all. There's been some times where I've said something and then the whole room goes silent. And it's so interesting because some people in the office are aware of neurodiversity, have been diagnosed as autistic. Actually, I know someone's diagnosed as ADHD. I forget if they're autistic as well. So they have this awareness. It's so interesting having someone who does occasionally say offensive things, because it just comes out. And then sometimes they are reacting to someone else saying something offensive. And then I'm watching this interaction and dynamic and laughing because I think it's funny seeing someone who's aware of how the other person is likely neurodivergent and can't help themselves, but also feeling offended. And I'm laughing because I'm thinking that's the most offensive thing I've ever heard. But then just bursting out laughing with no context to other people. Like, for example, they're having this conversation where one of the people used to work at a call center for mattresses. Anyways, they were providing customer support for a company that sold mattresses. And the other person was expressing his dislike for the people who provided customer service for companies that bought mattresses. And the way he said it was just so offensive, like to this person that's sitting right in front of him. So that was like such a clear example. And at this point, I had some awareness of these neurological differences. And it was so interesting because I understood what was happening there. And, you know, the other person had grace. I did see like some offense in their face. But I've also had some situations where I offended this person as well. I said something offensive and of course didn't mean to, but of course it's that dropping the mask and becoming comfortable enough to where you're just speaking without a filter. And of course, the things that you can say can get you in hot water. I know that silent force. Oh, yeah. There is someone in the office, like the office manager, who I'm pretty sure is neurotypical, but is the most understanding person ever. Like after I said this thing that was really socially inappropriate, she had a nervous giggle, and like it was an attempt to try and normalize this thing, and everyone else was just dead silent. I stopped the train of conversation in its tracks. And it's so embarrassing because like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just said that. Like, yeah, now I know that that's not okay to say that, but it wasn't obvious to me in the moment. Okay, so we talked about difficulties adjusting behavior to suit various social contexts. And some people find this funny. Some people are offended, but some people find this really funny. They see you acting in socially inappropriate ways and they find it really funny. So I think I did in one group of friends, I think I did play that comedic role without recognizing that that's what was happening. Like they were very understanding of the inappropriate things I was saying and doing, because it was kind of funny. Okay. So another deficit in developing and maintaining relationships is an absence of interest in peers. And yeah, this can show up as, do I need friends? I don't think I need friends. Like they're too much effort and I'm not interested. Or like as a child, just making imaginary friends and playing with those imaginary friends. I did that a lot. Good times with those imaginary friends. I have memories of that. Yeah. I think this one can be fairly straightforward, and I do find that being around people does help, but there's a limit to how much that I can handle. And that limit to how much I can handle is a lot lower than I thought or imagined it was, because I spent so much time not engaging with people that I didn't realize that there was that limit. I just spent a lot of time not really hanging out or being with friends or maintaining those relationships. So like if you don't actively engage in it, you don't realize. And one thing I did do was I stopped using dating apps. Dating apps are another level of stress. Like the level of stress. I think for a lot of people it's stressful, but the level of stress that I experienced, like how would I know that, maybe some people had an easier time, and maybe even some people enjoyed using apps because it gave them validation. Certain people, of course. But for me, like, it was so crazy stressful. Because I'd be like putting the effort in to play the social game and check the messages. And when someone else didn't put in the same effort, I was angry and upset. Like, I'm playing the game. Why are you not playing the game? And of course, when you have to put in that much effort, there's going to be that level of expectation. Yeah, so yeah, dating apps are super stressful. And I think, even making friends when you're messaging on a one-to-one basis, like, that's stressful. Like, group chats can be helpful because there's less pressure. Or like showing up at events, like classes. Like, for example, there is a medieval sword fighting class. Like, that would be something like you could show up, or jujitsu or yoga. Like, being able to like pay for a class, if you can afford it, and show up at a class, you get to be around people and meet people, but you don't necessarily have to interact with people, which is like the nice part. No dating apps for me, way too stressful. Yeah, like, that's something I didn't realize. I thought, okay, I'm feeling quite stressed about this, like, other people must be too, but it's possible that's not the case. Oh. Okay, so we are on the next criteria. So this one is restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. And I think this is affected by your influences in life. If you are heavily pushed from a young age to go outside of a restrictive pattern of behavior, then like you're basically trained to engage in different things. So I think your influences growing up can affect you quite a bit. Okay, so we have stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects, or speech. So, like, this is very clearly geared towards children, lining up toys. I know for me as a kid, I loved the Count from the Sesame Street TV show. And I remember loving, I think I mentioned this before, like the jewelry boxes or the bead boxes. So you've got all these different tiny, tiny beads, and they get all mixed up in the different compartments. So I'd like sort them all by color painstakingly. And I think it gives a level of like peace and comfort to the mind to be able to do that. Echolalia. So basically repeating words. So someone else says some words and you're just repeating it. And idiosyncratic phrases. So I've heard someone talk about this and say how, this technique of using these idiosyncratic phrases can be used as a method of expressing yourself. And of course, an autistic trait, it's difficulty expressing yourself. So if you don't know how to express yourself, you can just pull out this phrase if it's something that other people are familiar with. For example, like a quote from a TV show, and you can say it and other people will understand. But if your audience doesn't understand it, it can come across as weird. And of course, there's degrees to this as well. Okay. Insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines, ritualized patterns of verbal or non-verbal behavior. So I didn't demonstrate a lot of this as a child, so this might be an area where I don't fit the criteria. Oh, the echolalia. Yeah, I've got some new words here today. So you can have someone who has extreme distress at small changes, difficulty with transitions, and rigid thinking patterns. So for me, the rigid thinking patterns, I can think of a particular example where we were at ski practice and we were doing this preparation for a ski race, and I was with this coach who was trying to get me to transition. So we were doing intervals or something, and I wanted to visualize, and what I'd planned to do was messed up and somehow, and she was trying to get me to transition or adapt to the situation. I was like, no, I can't. I can't adapt. This is not going how I planned for it to go. And there was only her and I in that situation, but maybe if there's someone else there, they might have judged me for that inflexibility, that inability to transition. And of course, I was a teenager, so a teenager doesn't necessarily have those skills developed to be able to transition, because we can always develop new skills, but the thing is, how much time is it going to take you to learn that skill and become good at it? It could take a lot of time and effort. So you can do it, but a lot of that's about setting reasonable expectations. So that's a small example there. And of course, you can have a lot of different things that will reflect this criteria. Difficulties with transitions. I'll use another example from ski racing. So this isn't a particular example I would use as like a diagnostic criteria. I'm just saying, I'm looking at, this criteria, and I'm thinking of examples in my own life that I resonate with. And I consider myself to be fairly high functioning, although, not as high functioning as I would like to consider myself to be. So I'm really being honest with myself. You know what? I know you've been trying really hard for a long time, but you're not doing so well in this area. Let's make some changes, or let's, change your expectations for what you want to achieve here. So the difficulties with transitions related to ski racing. My coach would say, you know what? She has trouble being in a new environment. Transition. Adjusting to a new environment. So when you're at a ski race, you're in a new environment. So he says, okay, so you need to have a race at this place before we are going to do the qualifying race for this championships. So he recognized that right away. And of course, I didn't have a conscious understanding of this, but I recognized that, you know what, okay, I can't just, jump into a new place with a ski race and expect to be able to do really well, because it's a lot. I remember ski racing being a lot. The interesting thing is that I was good at it. My mom was a ski coach, and I skied from a young age. Both my parents were ski instructors, and I spent a lot of my childhood skiing. I spent huge amounts of time doing it, so I was really good at it. But here's the thing. Ski races, the level of noise and chaos and stress is so huge, and I think part of the reason why I wasn't exceptional as a ski racer were these kind of issues that we're talking about here. I think I lacked some very important things to be able to be really good at it, and I didn't know or recognize there was some embarrassment about I should be able to do better at this, and I just need to push myself harder. Transition is very difficult for me, especially at my job or when I'm hyper-focused on something. Yeah, shy art. The transitions are huge. And that can make it so difficult because, if you, at your job, you have to start something new. You have to motivate yourself to start this new thing, and you're not engaged with it. If I have a project where it's clear, first of all, it's clear what I need to do. I don't need a lot of information that I don't know. So sometimes we'll have projects where there's information that I don't know. So I either have to do a lot of research, and like that's it takes a lot of energy because I'm stretching outside of my comfort zone of what I know. So that takes a lot of mental focus, and it's stressful because sometimes there's a time limit on what I'm trying to do and I don't know the answer, right? Like we need something today and I don't know the answer, and that's quite stressful. Or I'll put it off and procrastinate it because like, you know what, that takes a lot of brain power. I don't feel like doing that right now. Even if I do know how to do it, like I'm like, I can figure that out if I think about it a lot, but I don't feel like getting into it. But then once I get into it, I'm like, yeah, I can do it. So yeah, this has been a struggle for me at my job. And of course, for example, if you start doing something that is like video games is a good example, but I don't do video games because I know how difficult it would be for me to get anything done if I played video games, because I would have a hard time stopping. But you know, there's other things that I use to help calm. So for example, like when I try to go to sleep, it's difficult because my mind is going, so I try to calm it down. I like to read manga. I used to watch TV series, but then of course, if I get engaged in reading the manga, then I'll stay up too late and I won't be able to get to sleep. Anyways, of course, you know, that's one transition that I find really difficult, trying to go to sleep, and I'm getting a lot better at it than I used to be. But yeah, that's definitely a difficult thing. Transition spaces are called liminal spaces. A liminal space is a boundary or transition. Luminal space, as in luminal mind, is all about landing on the other side of these transitions with your sanity. I think you can recognize that within yourself and then celebrate the small achievements, like landing on the other side with your sanity, and recognizing like these small things in your daily life that are really big things. Yeah, I love that. I love video games, mainly 80s, 90s, and early 2000s games. Yeah. I think during my first semester in my computer science degree, during the exam period, I was playing League because there was someone in my class who was very invested in it, and I did not study. And so then I uninstalled it because I recognized that if I didn't, I would continue to not study. And I didn't do badly because my courses were fairly easy to me, but I wasn't happy with the results that I got. And of course, the next semester courses were harder. Chris Torres. Yeah, if you want to share more about what you mean by the fourth density foundation in order to see the light of fifth density. Oh, were you talking about the liminal and luminal space in terms of that transition? If that's what you're talking about, I see where you're at. If it's not, you can clarify it. Okay, so with the restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, there can be insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines, ritualized patterns of verbal or non-verbal behavior. And that's the same slide as the last one, okay. Or maybe we hadn't transitioned yet. So the next point is highly restricted fixated interests that are abnormal in terms of intensity or focus. So they could, your interests could blend in and seem normal, but there might be a high level of fixation on those interests, which could lead you to becoming really good at them. So that could be a strength. Yeah, so the key point here is just like the intensity with which you pursue that interest, which can make you an interesting person because it can give you knowledge and skills that are valuable in that specific area. Okay, so another aspect of restricted or repetitive patterns of behavior could be a result of hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input. So let's say you have hyperreactivity to sensory input. So what you could be doing is basically, you know what, that was really painful, but this right here, this works for me. So I'm going to wear the same clothes and eat the same food and be really careful about, the behavior that I exhibit, because I don't want to experience that like extreme discomfort. So you can be avoiding things that are uncomfortable, and that can make your behavior really restrictive. There can also be a hyporeactivity to sensory input. So that can be sensory seeking. So that actually sounds a little bit like ADHD, which we'll talk about more next week, where you have this sensory seeking because you're not getting enough dopamine. There's less dopamine being triggered, so there is this sensory seeking to try and get more dopamine. So this is actually similar here, where this could be you're getting less dopamine from the stimulus, so you're pursuing more dopamine. I also wanted to do a series, or at least one live on, for example, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and how those affect us, because that's quite significant as well. And it's definitely very related, to this topic. So if you've got your sensory seeking and you're trying to trigger that dopamine, you can have this really repetitive behavior where you're trying to basically get enough dopamine. If you don't have enough reactivity, so you're trying to get more. Because everyone exists in terms of this kind of neutral or base level, and if you're not getting enough reactivity or stimulus from your environment, you need more. So if you're not, most people are getting like a certain amount of stimulus from your environment, and if you're hyporeactive, you're not getting that level of stimulus, so you're going to seek more stimulus. So this sounds very similar to ADHD. And of course, that sensitivity issue can be really challenging. So one thing that I experience is difficulty sleeping, because it's almost like not being able to relax, because like feeling like if the bed sheets are not perfectly clean, that feels like uncomfortable, or like that it's too hot. Yeah, I've had so much difficulty sleeping, especially in the summer. In the winter, you can at least put more covers on. But in the summer, I actually move and go live somewhere else where it's cooler, because I just can't sleep. And then if you can't sleep, like that ruins your life. Difficulty sleeping, yeah. Oh my gosh. Sleep is actually so hard. But now it makes sense why. The other thing, like on hiking trips, so we do multi-day backpack trips, and sleeping is really difficult there because we don't shower, right? And so you've got this sweat, and so the sweat on the skin is like so uncomfortable. It's so hard to relax enough to fall asleep. Okay, so again, with the hyperreactivity, you can have adverse responses to specific sounds or textures, and to avoid or pursue more of that, that can limit you in terms of the behaviors. There's also this excessive smelling or touching objects. I haven't seen anyone exhibit this behavior. I do have a coworker who has this impulse to eat the plants at work. I don't know if that's related though. Of course, if we had herbs, they could go ahead and eat them, no problem, but we've got like tropical plants, so you can't eat those. And this fascination with lights or movement, which from what I understand is related to, it's like that sensory, so it can serve different functions. It can serve as a self-regulation, or it can serve as providing dopamine in the brain, and can provide like this soothing mechanism. So exactly what that's related to, I don't know specifically, but I do have some ideas about what that could relate to. I slowly change my sleeping time and feel a lot better. Yeah, Chris, like I need to do that too. There's always like this part of my mind that's like, yes, this is a good thing to do before bed. Like, no, it's not. I have a relaxation app installed on my phone, and I should start using it. I should like start doing yoga before bed. Like that would be good. That would probably help me relax and fall asleep. Okay, so the next one. Symptoms must be present in early developmental period. So they're saying just autism isn't something that you develop later in life. It's just something that is present throughout your life. However, it may not become fully manifest until social demands exceed limited capacities. And so I really felt this strongly in my 20s, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. So it also may be masked by learned strategies later in life. So you have people who are adults who have learned these strategies to mask, and they may have some challenges or struggles in their life, but then they also may be really good at masking, but then not being fully or authentically themselves, and they basically like have these wounds where they felt not good enough, and they had to like strive to become good enough to feel like they fit in or feel normal. And actually learning this about themselves can create a lot of healing. Borderline psychedelic sensory awareness. Oh wow, nighttime routine is essential. Breath work works for me. Okay, nighttime routine. I gotta do that. Thank you. I find that during the day, it's easier to connect to reality. At nighttime is when your mind can drift and wander and not be as connected to this reality. I find waking up so hard now. Waking up and then coming into this reality and being like, oh, this place. Like, I mean, I've been some nice places in my dreams lately. But it's so weird, like waking up in this reality and like remembering where I am. Whoa, luminal mind. That reminds me of a dream I had lately. You said you've been working on this course on what's it called? The dreaming. I don't remember the word. And of course your comment will show up in a little bit because of the lag or the delay. But you know the course, what it's called. I had a dream where everything was going good. it was very interesting, but then it turned dark, and we're part of like this dark group, and they started like ordering the members to like off each other. And so I was running. I wanted to get out of there. And there was the road, and I took this doorway off the road and went into like this space that I'd been in a dream space before, the lucid dreaming. Yes, that's right. And it was like this multi-layer complex. And all like these dark people just followed me into this space, and I was freaking out. Like, they found me. But then I decided, okay, I'm just gonna fill the whole space with light, and that will eliminate the ones that can't handle the light. And I looked back and I thought like, oh, that's an interesting method. And it's strange. It worked. Because we've been talking about, I have other live streams that are talking about ascension and the ascension process, and we're basically like lifting out of 3D into 5D. And as we lift out, we're moving through parallel realities, and people are melting away. Maybe that's not a great way to put it. How can I say this better? As you move through parallel realities, the people in your lives that show up are slightly different. And some people won't show up anymore, because you're moving through those realities as you elevate yourself. But like, when I woke up, I thought about that, and I thought like that wasn't fully lucid dreaming, but that was like, it was a technique to release the fear that I was feeling in that moment, and it shifted the dream. I grieve the dream. Phasing into the world matrix maneuvering is super difficult. I feel you on that. Yeah, that seems it seems like interesting, and that's just recent too for me. Hyperdimensional consciousness awareness. Yeah, that's cool, Chris. Again, if you want to share more on that, please do. Okay. So here's another aspect. The symptoms must cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of current functioning. And this is for autism. That's not explained by an intellectual disability or global developmental delay. And we're almost done with this DSM-5 criteria. Okay, so here's the thing. And this is one of the reasons I think that I may not fall into the category of autism at a diagnostic level. So you need clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of current functioning. So I am struggling in some areas, but I do have a job, and I have been able to make some friends. So here's the thing. I think that, having a nighttime routine, realizing I need schedules, things where if you can find an accountability buddy, that's great. But I've been trying out some apps and trying to work with that. And also recognizing, like, this wasn't mentioned here, but autism and ADHD are often have genetic components to them. So I'm recognizing these traits in my family, and I'm starting to have more compassion for them and recognizing, you know what, there are ways that we could navigate these issues and problems probably better. And I don't have to engage in that level of like bitterness, anger, and judgment with my family. If I can understand and recognize, you know what, this is a neurological difference that, maybe someone could take medication for if it is ADHD, but a huge thing with ADHD is cues in the social environment, and hopefully we'll get to that more next week. But the thing is that for me personally, I am functioning enough, maybe not as much as I would like to be, or as much as like my self-image projected to myself that I was. Like I had reasons why, like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I went through depression, so it set me back, and that's why I'm still struggling. Like, no, like you're still struggling with this kind of issue because you have these intrinsic aspects of your functioning that is making it difficult for you, and you're not necessarily helping yourself with it. And so that's why I say, a formal diagnosis isn't necessary for everyone. Okay, so the hyperdimensional consciousness awareness. I think a person would have to be at least fourth density consciousness to be able to see infinity and the fourth dimension. Yeah, absolutely. You can't be in 3D and see that. Yeah, it's okay. You're on topic. I asked you to explain that more. It takes only a moment to experience eternity in the dream, astral spheres, or in visionary states. Yeah, and I think, I think that's the aspect of the human experience that is valuable, because this is an aspect of experience and a state, and there are limitations to it, but those limitations give you a unique perspective. No matter how challenging it is, there is still aspects of reality and states that you can experience that are mind-blowing and amazing and incredible. So it's worthwhile to hang in there even when it's tough. Because when we're struggling, we forget, oh, there's amazing things that we can experience that we haven't experienced. So that's the interesting thing, to be able to push yourself within the realm of human experience. Okay, so that was the last slide directly on the DSM-5 criteria, which I took from Orion Kelly's video. And so I'm going to I have some points on what Orion Kelly says about this. Some autistic people struggle socially, but others find a way to mimic others' mask and excel socially in certain settings. And the issue here is like, oh, they're doing fine, right? Well, maybe not, because they might not be building connections with people because they're too busy playing a role. May not be able to be authentic. May have trouble keeping friends. I mean, mind you, there's no pill for autism, so there's no cure. So in part of the criteria, we talked about difficulty expressing personal experience or emotions. There is the issue of alexithymia. And I already forget. Oh, alexithymia is related to this difficulty in expressing your emotions. So I forget if I mentioned this already as well, but I definitely experienced this. Not really having an awareness of feeling emotions throughout high school, and then having depression, only realizing that I had depression because my body shut down. I went to the doctor. The doctor says you have depression. Okay, I don't feel depressed, but I didn't feel a lot of emotions. Like, I felt anxiety, but I wouldn't be able to label that as like, oh, that's anxiety. Looking back and realizing like, oh, okay, so that's a thing. there's all these aspects of my experience that are difficult to, from an outside perspective, label and say like, oh, someone else to label and say like, oh, yeah, that's a neurodivergent trait. These are things that I experienced internally. Okay, so Oran Kelly also brought up autistic meltdowns. They're this state of overwhelm and overstimulation. There's this complete dysregulation from the outside world. And the issue here is like symptoms can appear like borderline personality disorder. Oh. So autistic and also autistic burnout. So this autistic meltdowns, from what I understand about it, is it's just there can be imploding to the inside and exploding to the outside. So exploding would be very visible expressions of this. So it could be throwing a tantrum. You see that more in kids than adults. So an adult might implode where they're not responsive. They're not able to respond. And I think of not too long ago, there was a Christmas holiday where I had an episode like this where I could not respond. Like I was deeply dysregulated, could not respond to anyone. And there was a bunch of people in our house for Christmas and they were quite loud and it was like overstimulating and I was really upset. And there were some kids there my nieces who tried to interact with me, and I feel bad about the response that I had to them, which was basically ignoring them, because kids tend to feel like it's their fault. Of course it's not their fault, but how do they know that? Oh, that was awful. And the after effects of that lasted several days as well, trying to re-regulate. Oh, that was awful, because like there's people there experiencing that, like they don't know what's wrong. So that was one specific scenario which actually happened. It was about like not the past Christmas but the Christmas before, so that's not as a child, like that's recent. And that's hard to experience that as an adult, and other people look at you and say like, you're an adult, like what's wrong with you? And you don't know. Right? Oh, I would say autistic meltdown could be a specific case. Like it could be just like a burst of overstimulation or overwhelm, and then it's episodic. But autistic burnout, I think, is something that can take a very, very long time to recover from. So from high school up to recently, I had several episodes of burnout, which lasted a year or longer. And this happened. I look back and I think like, wow, this has happened enough to recognize the pattern. This chronic exhaustion prolonged periods of stress, like you're not able to self-regulate over an extended period of time. Yeah, doing a master's was not helpful. So here's the thing, like you can be suppressing and masking, which takes a lot of energy, and you're not resting properly. So this is where it builds up over time, and then you get burned out. I know burnout. It totally sucks. Working much on energy conservation in all areas, including spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional energy reserves. I have shutdowns. Oh. Yeah, it's not fun. A level of numbness. Don't notice the pain or anxiety. Oh, yeah. That's a good point. Like, So another issue that hasn't come up here is the idea of interoception, which I think is related to alexithymia, that okay, maybe alexithymia is difficulty expressing your emotions or what you're feeling. Otherwise, interoception is difficulty realizing or experiencing or having a conscious awareness of what you're feeling, so you can not consciously be aware that you're stressed or anxious, which doesn't make it easier. Where you can have you don't notice the pain or anxiety. So yeah, so like the numbness, I think the numbness shows up so you're not dealing with that overstimulation. And like that could show up as like what seems like depression, like you could seem like you're depressed. Ugh. It's awful. It's so awful. Burnout can happen in a flash. Yeah, because it builds and builds and builds, and it happens. Because you don't notice it or realize it's coming. In my mind, I'm thinking the meltdown is easier to or quicker to recover from. Maybe not easier, but you can recover from in a shorter time frame. Otherwise, the burnout can take a really long time to recover from. But you can have burnout from a shorter period too. Like you like get burned out over the week, and the weekend you're like trying to replenish your stores. And in the ADHD video, we'll talk about how, you have like this tank, and then if you have all this stress, so just living can be extra stressful for you compared to someone else who is neurotypical. So just living can be extra stressful for you, and it just depletes the tank sooner. So you need to replenish that tank more often. Okay, so we made it to the end of the slides. So that's all we're going to do for today. Thank you for joining. And you can share any last thoughts in the chat. Of course, we just went briefly over like the burnout and the meltdowns. And of course, you could talk about them in a lot more depth. I do remember there was one story that I planned to talk about, and I forget what it was. I'll just wait and see if you have anything else you want to share in the chat, and I'll try to remember what that example was. I think it maybe was from, I'm not sure. That's okay. Yeah, so talking about, that DSM-5 criteria, I'm not sure if it helps or not, right? Because like we have those specific things, but then the lived experience, like how do you match it to those things, right? And some of the things, if you go on social media and people are describing their experience of being autistic or having ADHD, they will describe things that are not in the diagnostic criteria, but are kind of consequences or results of that. So they're kind of down the line from that. Always a true pleasure spending some study time with you all. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, good night. Yeah, thank you for joining. Should be back next week. And I'll try, if the 5 p.m. PSD is a good time, I'll try to stick to that time. So have a good week and See you later.